And what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of MLS History Retold on the Designated Players and MLS podcast. On today's episode, we're bringing back a story from The Athletic about when the New England Revolution brought around a giant stuffed bunny to their games, only to realize that it may have cost them a chance at the title. Then, a jump back in time to relive a lone bright spot in a dismally low season for Toronto FC, who rescued a point thanks to Dichio's last-minute header. I'm Andrew. That's Connor over there. This is MLS History Retold. Connor, you made a face when I introduced that. What were you doing?
The bunny thing just seems ridiculous. That's going to be an interesting story to listen to.
So it came out of and I'll reference it again, but it came out of a very cool COVID piece from The Athletic. This was before I subscribed. So sorry, Tom, if you're listening, because I know you listen to all of our stuff. Before I subscribed to The Athletic, I actually got a 24-hour free trial, and I copied the entire thing and put it in a Word document. I read it in a Word document.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's how badass I was. I still have that Word document.
Send you to jail right now. I got the police on speed dial.
But no, it was a story about 25 MLS scandals, pranks, and improprieties. So just some of the weird, MLS stuff that we're kind of covering here. A couple of our stories have taken place. So that's where I think not the Olive Garden story. I think the Zardmeister might have been from there too.
Mm.
But yeah, I think I sent it to you. I doubt you read it because you don't read anything I send you. But
Yeah, no, I definitely don't read anything you send to me. That's why I have no idea the topics we talk about on the
brother, I
news
sent
segment.
you so many DMs, be like, oh, this is a great conversation starter. All I see is like scene. And you never.
This is why it's so hard to keep up with what topics we're talking about, because you send me so many things. I can't keep up with
If
it.
you just communicated with me like a normal human being, we'd be fine.
I
But
don't, but that's
but
the
you
problem.
hate.
I don't. The guys were yelling at me tonight about Snapchat because I responded back to Matt's
Brother.
PSV
Yeah,
kit. They were like, I was confused. That
tweet.
was like a day
Listen.
ago.
All right. Well, you know what I do want you to talk about? I want you to talk about that scarf that you got. It looks really
uh,
nice.
Before I talk about the scarf, I do want to mention I got a twofer tonight, a twofer story because we had two topics related to this one game. So I'm going to cover two MLS stories in this episode, but I'm not
Ooh.
going to spoil. I mean, you kind of already spoiled one of them, but I'm going to do my best not to spoil the other one, and you'll have to listen to the story to find out what it's about. But you'll know if Andrew, if you look at the stories list that we have, the next game that's on the list is, or the next story is also from this game. So
Oh,
I'm
very
going to
cool.
cover
I didn't
both.
know that.
Yes, I didn't know that either because I went to the next one to try to find the next story to talk about, and it happened to be from the same game. So I was like, well, that's fate. I'm stuck with this one.
There
Uh,
you go.
my stretch of a scarf, because I thought we were talking about different things, is related. If I'm talking about Toronto FC and their expansion season, might as well bring in MLS's most recent expansion team. I got the St. Louis scarf. Thank you to Chris from STL Soccer News for sending over this absolutely wonderful scarf. And Andrew has one as well. I'm sure he'll point at it on his wall because that's what he loves to do. There it is. It looks really good on the wall. The
Yeah,
white logo with
right in
the.
the middle. Yeah, pops, don't it?
Mhm.
Um, I also have a stretch because my topic covers New England, whose scarf I do not have. Should get one relatively soon. We're talking about them a lot, but New England does include Rhode Island. So
That's a stretch, all right.
Providence City, baby.
I like
That's
the
a
skulls on it. That's
so
cool.
it's really sick. And I don't know if again, another thing I sent you probably didn't see, but
Yeah,
um,
definitely.
they had a game against New York Greek. Can't remember what their full name was, but they're a relatively older like New York amateur team. New York Greek. Oh, maybe it's just New York Greek Americans. Then they might have changed it. Um,
That name sounds familiar.
yeah,
Like
but
one of those weird USOC names.
yeah, right. So they were supposed to play in the U.S. Open Cup, and the New York team drove all 6 hours to Rhode Island to play this game. Stepped on the field and was like, "This field isn't playable. We're not going to play on it." Referees came in and nope, it's good to play. We'll fill. There was a hole in the ground because of whatever. They filled it, painted over it, done. I know we're still not going to play on it. It had 4, 5, 6 excuses. They fixed them all. Ref said we're good to play, and they're like, nope, and they just took their kits off and they walked away. So Providence made a whole thing of like the highlights from the game that never happened. So they videotaped the
Oh, I
whole
do
thing.
remember seeing a tweet about that. Yeah,
Yeah, they videotaped the whole thing, and they made like a whole highlight video of them like complaining about it, the people filling the thing. I was like, oh, that's sick. So
yeah.
shout out Providence for some elite storytelling. But speaking of some elite storytelling, I gotta tell you about this traveling bunny, man. I feel like people need to know.
I'm dying to know, so let me know.
So I do, like I mentioned before, I want to give a special shout out to the Athletic and specifically Pablo Maurer and Sam Stechkel for their reproduction of the 25 MLS scandals, pranks, and improprieties story, where this story comes from. Now, I've beefed it up a little bit and kind of given some background and some story behind it with some storytelling narrative that I'm just, naturally known for. But right now, the year's 2007, New England Revolution are in top form yet again. Taylor Twellman's bagging goals, Matt Reese, Michael Parkhurst locking down the back. Young stars like Jeff Lorenowitz are starting to emerge. And they just actually shipped off a decent young striker. Some of you may know the name Clint Dempsey to test his luck overseas. They were looking to rebound from the heartbreak of MLS Cup Final 2006, losing to the Houston Dynamo in penalty kicks. They were determined to right the wrongs of 2006, winning everything in their path: MLS Cup, US Open Cup, Supporter Shield, everything. Along the way, an icon of sorts was discovered in the form of a giant bunny. More on that later. But did it help them achieve their goals? That's the question. The story is the answer. This story is strictly about the celebrations after a US Open Cup victory. So for anybody who thinks that the players don't care about the US Open Cup, this story may change your mind. But before we even do that, let's go and chat about how they got to the final in the first place. In the 2007 iteration of the US Open Cup, and this may shock some people, only 8 teams actually entered that competition from MLS, and it still survived. Crazy, I know. New England, along with 7 other MLS sides, entered the round of 32. I believe it was a third round, and were drawn with a belter of a first, round matchup for them in the Rochester Raging Rhinos of the USL. This great side from upstate New York fought mightily, but the New England Revolution dispensed them 4-2 to move on into the cup, thanks to a brace by Steve Ralston and another brace by Taylor Twellman. Next, they would face up with another USL side, the Harrisburg City Islanders. Early goals from Andy Dorman and Taylor Twellman once again would ensure a 2-1 quarterfinal win and a semifinals date with yet another USL side, the Carolina Railhawks. Yes, a very difficult path to the final, some may say. However, this was a more difficult test than the others and saw Jeff Lorenowitz and Anthony Mayer traded goals to get the game to extra time, where Pat Noonan would score early on in the first period to win the game and get to the finals against their first MLS opponent, FC Dallas. And what a final it was. Now, as great as this game was, it is not the focus of the story, and we may actually need to add it because it was such a good game. However, I will just give the brief highlights where Pat Noonan and Arturo Alvarez traded goals before Twellman gave New England the lead just before halftime. Coming out of the break, Wells Thompson got a goal of his own to double the lead. And then FC Dallas would get one back through Abe Thompson, no relation. But New England would see the match out and get things rolling. And by things, I mean celebrations. After the game, it was party time. New England won a trophy after an agonizing MLS Cup final defeat last season, and they were ready to celebrate. From the article, from a beer-soaked locker room to a series of strip clubs, they traveled around the towns like the kings of American soccer they were. So much so that a player on the team ended up spending half of the league's minimum salary on drinks and entertainment for that night alone. That's $13,000 for anybody wondering. That was all before they even moved back to the hotel. Now, a reminder, this game took place on October 3rd.
On October 3rd, he asked me what day it was.
It's October 3rd.
And anyone who's been around a hotel near the holidays knows that those places start to set up for the holidays relatively early. And this hotel was no different. However, what they did do differently was leave the closet with all of the decorations in it open. Most people listening can probably do the math. At the end of the night, the Revs bus, full of drunken US Open Cup champions, had one extra figure on it in the form of a $1,000 5-foot-tall Easter bunny. Not only was it brought back, it was brought everywhere, which included the first game after the final of the US Open Cup, which was Chicago Fire away. Now, a quick mention on New England's season up to this point. New England started off hot in their first 10 games, only losing 2 of them. They followed up their next 10 games where they only lost, you guessed it, 2 games. They would then win or draw 5 of their next 7 games. That's 2 losses, in case you're noticing a trend here, before heading into the US Open Cup final against Dallas, where we start putting the pieces together, right? This whole time, New England were chasing DC for the top of the East and the top of the Supporters' Shield standings. They were hot, but Luciano Emilio and company were hotter. It was coming down to the wire, and any drop points now would be detrimental. The Revs players, high on adrenaline from the US Open Cup title, brought the bunny to Chicago. And not only did they bring it to Chicago, they brought it out to the field when they trained the day prior. They put a training kit on it and left it on the sideline like it was another player. Then they gave it its own locker in the Toyota Park locker room before the game. They dressed it up, sat it down like it was another one of those players. Quite clearly, they weren't switched on as much as you would expect, but no worries, right? New England would end up losing that game 2-1 after going up early through Jeff Lorenowitz. But no worries, right? New England still third in the Shield race, 5 points back. However, a win would have put them second, just 2 points back. But no worries, right? Like it's just one game, they'll be fine. They would travel back to Gillette Stadium, where they were so dominant that year, to take on the Columbus Crew, who were scrapping for the playoffs as the 5th place team in the East out of 7. Relatively straightforward it should be, right? So much so that they didn't worry about their extra player on the roster. The bunny was brought back in and was treated just as well as anybody else could have been. He was once again given his very own locker and his very own training top, and it was off to the game. Everybody's feeling a high. Everybody's thinking that they're doing great. This exciting match would end as a 3-2 loss after Guillermo Barros Schelotto would score an 86th-minute winner just minutes after Steve Ralston got them level. A loss dropped them to 4th place in the Shield standing, 6 points back. If you think about it, a win here, a win last week, and the results that DC had gotten to this point, they would be leading the Supporters' Shield right now. Clear by 2 points. At the end of that game, the Supporters' Shield US Open Cup double was gone. There was no chance they could win the Supporters' Shield. And since the players weren't really superstitious, but they were a little stitious, they thought that the bunny had to go. So they took the bunny out back and they destroyed it where it stood. They beat the crap out of it. They ripped it apart, killed it. Hopefully ridding the demons which haunted the team. Or so they thought. Their last game was against Wooden Spoon winners Toronto FC. A surefire way to pick up some points and get a little bit higher in the standings, right? Or maybe they had their night ruined by a man named Danny Dichio. I won't spoil it. Yeah, I will. They tied that game 2-2. They picked up 1 point in their last 3 games to lead them to a 4th place finish in the table. When the Supporters' Shield was in reach just 3 games ago. A kick in the gut after such a high from the US Open Cup win. But it's okay because this is MLS and the season doesn't end there. They were second in the Eastern Conference seeding in MLS playoffs, and they were hoping that their luck had turned heading into November since the bunny was dead. And things started off well, where they were able to bribe a bunch of referees to let them beat the New York Rebels in a 2-game series, 1-0, thanks to a Taylor Twellman goal in the second half of the second game. Twellman would bag another goal in the conference finals to beat Chicago and get them to the 2007 MLS Cup finals against none other than last year's opponent, the Houston Dynamo. In this game, the ball got rolling early, and Taylor Twellman scored. At this time, this was the 4th final in 6 years and 3rd final in a row. Twellman scoring as early as he did, no doubtedly, left some hope in New England fans that they may finally be seeing an MLS Cup victory. But at halftime, something changed. Almost as if a spirit came over the Revs, or maybe bunny hopped over them. Joseph Nguyen and Dwayne De Rosario added goals in the 61st and the 74th minute to steal the title from New England and had them their 3rd MLS Cup final loss in a row. Did New England blow it yet again? They did. Did they have anybody to blame but themselves? Maybe. Maybe not. Would the team have finished first in the Supporters' Shield race, rode the wave of success into finally winning their first MLS Cup and one of the first domestic trebles in MLS history? The world may never know. But they say that if you move an ancient artifact from a sacred land, you are cursed forever. Who knows how long that bunny was there? Who it belonged to? What powers it had? Now, until the end of time, we will all be left just to wonder. What if they never moved the bunny?
I don't know. It seems like weak sauce to blame it on the bunny, especially if you didn't go on and if you went on and won the whole thing after destroying the bunny, that's one thing. But they they clearly didn't do that. And thank you for spoiling my part of the episode, you bum.
Connor, you know what I miss most about going to games in real life?
What's that, Andrew?
Taking home that real ticket stub at the end of the day. Everything's all electronic these days, and we've lost the ability to collect those memories.
I couldn't agree more. I love having the physical keepsakes from games, and I wish they didn't do away with these.
Well, lucky for you, today's sponsor, StubForge, can help you fill that void. StubForge is a custom ticket company that helps you bring memories to life in the form of real, physical, customizable ticket stubs. With 7 different styles to choose from, you can create a custom ticket for any event your heart desires. From events you have attended in the past to dream matchups like RBNY winning this year's MLS Cup.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. Not only can you bring your memories to life, it is also a great way to make unique and fun invitations to parties, weddings, events, and so much more to make them feel like VIPs to the biggest occasions in your life.
These tickets look and feel like the real thing, printed on the same stock Ticketmaster uses and with actual ticket printers so that you can be sure the quality will be just as good as what you'd get at the gate.
Not to mention how easy it is to design. Just go online to stubforge.com and start creating right away. The amount of customization you can add to these tickets is unreal. From venues, addresses, show and print times, seat location, prices, and so much more. You can make the ticket exactly as you dreamed it would be, all with just a few clicks.
Man, when we take our designated player tour of all the stadiums in the league, we're going to have to get some of these to commemorate each and every match.
100%. If you want to create your own tickets, head over to stubforge.com. That's stubforge.com and start designing today. All right. Well, now that you've already spoiled part of my story, I'll give you the details of what happened in that particular game with Danny Dichio. And I'm going to give you a bonus story because it also involves this game. But I'm not going to tell you what it is because you're going to find out, like Andrew will, when I tell the story. So I've purposely titled this story vaguely, but we will be talking about New England Revolution versus Toronto FC, the game on October 20th, 2007. The New England Revolution took on the New Boys and Toronto FC on the final game of the 2007 season. It was honestly a completely meaningless game for both sides. Toronto had slightly more to play for in the fact that they could potentially avoid winning the wooden spoon with the result here. However, New England was already locked in at the 2 seed in the East behind DC United. Despite that fact, we somehow got 2 moments that ended up as part of this history series. Who would have thought? Let's dive a little bit more into the history before we jump into the game itself. So, Andrew focused a lot on the New England side of things. I'm going to focus on the Toronto side of things. As mentioned before, Toronto was coming into their first ever season in MLS, with MLS veterans like Jeff Cunningham, likely the most recognizable name on the roster. However, another player that would make a name for themselves was Maurice Adu. He's not relevant to the story, but I felt he still deserved the shout out. Toronto would look to right the mistakes of recent inaugural expansion sides who flopped big time in their first year. The start of the season was not a strong indication of them righting the wrongs of expansion teams. Toronto would go on to lose their first 4 games without scoring a single goal. And this was a sign of things to come as Toronto would have a disastrous season that at one point saw them go winless in 12 straight games. The last game of the season was an opportunity to give the fans one last thing to cheer for, especially since they were playing at home. As Andrew mentioned, New England, on the other hand, was coming in with the opposite going for them. They were locked into their 6th straight season of making the playoffs, with 5 of those 6 seasons seeing them as at least the top 2 seed in the East. Talk on to the fact that New England's first ever trophy in the 2007 US Open Cup, and the team was definitely looking strong this season. As mentioned before, going into this game against Toronto, there was probably only one thing in mind. Don't get hurt before the playoffs. So let's begin with the game. Toronto would line up with both the aforementioned Cunningham and Adu starting the game, whereas New England would also run out a strong lineup with the likes of Taylor Twellman and Matt Reese highlighting the side. The game had no goals through almost the entirety of the first half and was surely looking like it would stay that way with Toronto on the ball in the 45th +2. and not much pressure being applied by New England. However, that was about to change in the blink of an eye. Toronto brings the ball to midfield and then carelessly gives the ball away. However, New England is not in any bit of a threatening position, meaning the game is still likely to go to halftime 0-0. But before Toronto can even blink, the New England player who made the interception was shooting the ball towards the goal from their own half. There's nothing any of the outfield players on either side can do at this point, but stand and watch the ball as it soars towards the Toronto goal. Toronto goalkeeper Kyriakos Stamatopoulos, likely caught off guard, stumbles backwards to try and save the shot, screaming towards his goal. And with one last-ditch dive attempt, Stamatopoulos would just be out of reach, watching the ball fly into the net to give New England a seemingly impossible lead. Now, there was one key detail I left out of the story. Who scored the goal? Go ahead and take your guesses. Maybe it's their leading scorer for like the last 6 years in Taylor Twellman. How about another all-time New England forward in Pat Noonan? Both wrong. Try a 23-year-old Michael Parkhurt scoring his first goal of his career from his own half. Yeah, what an absolutely legendary way to score your first ever goal. That's how the score would stay going into the half, with New England leading 1-0. During halftime, Toronto head coach Mo Johnston would sub out struggling Jeff Cunningham to bring on the club's leading scorer, Danny Dichio. Now, you might be asking yourself, what kind of head coach wouldn't be starting their leading scorer? And that's a fair question. Well, this was because this was Dichio's first game back after having missed the last 8 regular season games due to injury. So the team was slowly working him back into games. Keep all of this in mind because it will be important later. The second half would not waste any time getting into the action, as this time New England's star boy Taylor Twellman would get his 16th goal of the season, scoring a header off a corner. After that goal, I'm sure there were a lot of Toronto fans in the stadium beginning to feel that here we go again feeling, as Toronto was staring right in the face of yet another defeat. However, today happened to be the day Colin Samuel became a powerlifter, because with the weight of defeat looming over the stadium, Samuel would score in the 59th minute to help lift that weight and breathe hope into the Toronto crowd. 10 minutes go by, no equalizer for Toronto. Then another 10 minutes. And another 10 minutes. And all of a sudden, that glimmer of hope in the 60th minute for a Toronto comeback was looking more and more pale. Stoppage time begins, and it's back to feeling like another defeat was on the horizon. With Toronto pressing for the equalizer, midfielder Carl Robinson headed a pass toward Dichio at the top of the box. He swiveled and one-timed a looping volley over the head of Revolution goalkeeper Matt Reese, which sent the sellout crowd into a frenzy. Yet another moment in this game with a goal coming in stoppage time, and this time it was in the favor of the home side, which sent the crowd wild. This game would finish 2-2 and would look like an absolute nothing burger when looking at the standings and scoreline. But once you dive a little bit deeper into the game, it actually turned out to be an absolute banger. CBC Sports had gotten the chance to interview Dichio after the game, where he was quoted as saying that he wasn't even supposed to have played this game, since he was still coming back from the aforementioned injury. However, head coach Mo Johnston told him to get out there and give it a go. Crazy to think this memorable moment for many Toronto fans may not have even happened had Johnston decided to play it safe and not play Dichio. RSL would go on to beat Colorado on the final day, meaning that despite all this work to come back and get a point in this game, Toronto would unfortunately take home the wooden spoon in their inaugural season. However, at least the team was able to give the fans one nice memory to end the year on.
That was a really nice story you had there, buddy. Like, that was very, very touching, very heartwarming.
I guess you could say that. I can't imagine Toronto fans still felt good about that season.
I will say
25
that
points is nothing to write home about.
I will say that I am disappointed that you haven't learned how to sneak Atlanta into things that Atlanta should be snuck into, like
They
I
don't
do.
exist. What do you mean?
Well, what do you mean? Michael Parkhurst was an Atlanta player.
How do I make mention to Michael Parkhurst being an Atlanta player here?
Maybe you need to listen to me
Do
more.
I just have to say Atlanta United legend Michael Parkhurst scored his
Correct.
first goal?
Yes, you have to make sure that you reference him properly.
Okay, I will start working on that, and I can throw in a Greek goalkeeper reference to Atlanta too.
Oh, Mr.
Tambakis.
Tambakis, yeah.
Yeah.
Very
Look at
nice.
that. See, I'm making up for it now with the Atlanta references for anybody that's still listening at this point.
Too bad we're cutting it. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. It is always a good time to go through some MLS history, especially crazy stories like the ones we went through today. So we hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you follow us wherever you get your podcasts, the next time we go live. And make sure you are following us on social media, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, especially YouTube, because we are probably not going to be on TikTok much longer, depending on what happens there. But yeah, we hope you enjoyed it. We definitely did. Thanks so much again. And we will see you next time on the next episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. See ya.